active fields of public history is local history. And what exactly do local historians do? Well, the term obviously gives it away, that they look at history from a local level. These local historians, they transcribe documents at the local level, they preserve family histories, they tell the story of people who won't usually make it into the history books, and they tell history from sometimes a county or community level. Almost every county in the state of Ohio, which is where I'm standing today, has a local historical society. And these local historical societies usually are made up of historians at the local level who work in connection with the Ohio History Connection, formerly the Ohio Historical Society. And together, through looking at family documents, wills, marriage records, death certificates, and cemeteries, they are able to piece together the history of a community and a family. Not only that, they often look into the war service of local areas. Sometimes when we write the histories of the big armies like the Army of the Potomac in the Civil War or the Army of the Tennessee in the Civil War, we forget about the individual regiments. And when you get to the individual regiments, you find the individual soldiers who made that regiment and fought and made the sacrifices to win the war. Locally, we talk about the 53rd Ohio Volunteer Infantry. They have a historical marker in Jackson, Ohio, where their camp was located. And that camp, of course, was called Camp Diamond. Local historians are also very active in making for sure there are historical markers in the appropriate places throughout the state of Ohio and other states. As you drive around, you will see, just right down the road, the markers that trace Morgan's Raiders from 1863 and the route they took through southern Ohio. That is based upon the research of local historians. They look at the newspaper articles, the journals, and sometimes we can even find documents that have slipped through the cracks for 100 years that are still in somebody's attic that can give us a new view of what happened in a community a long time ago. If it wasn't for local historians, public historians, and genealogists, family historians, at the very basic, small level, if you will, of history, we wouldn't have the larger history. And if you look around here in the cemetery, sometimes local historians even take part in preserving tombstones and writing down and transcribing what is written on the tombstones. They also take part in making for sure that local buildings that were of importance in the past are preserved and remembered for future generations. So even though sometimes people look at local historians as an amateur job, an amateur historian, because it doesn't necessarily deal with the grand armies or the presidents or the people who truly changed the history of the world from a very obvious level, the work of local historians tells the building blocks of those bigger stories. And without them, history would collapse. I am at the Pike County-Scioto County line in southern Ohio at the grave of Robert James Dunn. Robert James Dunn is an individual who will not make it into the history books, but he proves the value of public history, local history, and genealogy. Robert James Dunn was born in Ireland, and at a very early age, his family came to the United States of America. In 1861, after settling in southern Ohio, when the Civil War broke out, Robert James Dunn joined the 53rd Ohio Volunteer Infantry. They trained in nearby Jackson, Ohio, under the leadership of Jesse Appler. In 1862, Robert James Dunn faced his first enemy fire at the Battle of Shiloh. After Shiloh, under the direct command of Ulysses S. Grant, he partook in the siege of Vicksburg. Later, under William Tecumseh Sherman, he even marched to the sea. After the war, he came back here to southern Ohio and settled near Raritan, Ohio. He took part in establishing nearby Cotty's Corner Church. Now, all of this information that I just told you, again, does not appear in the great works of history. But this local history is a building block to that greater work of history. Without local historians and public historians looking up the life of Robert James Dunn and people like him and putting all this together, we would not have the overall history that we have today. If you look closely at this tombstone, you can also tell that the dates and information about his life are starting to be covered by weather and age. But if you go up to Columbus, Ohio, to the Ohio History Connection, and look inside of their vast volume of documents, you will find that a public historian went through all the cemeteries of Ohio and wrote down what was on these tombstones. So now today, we have information about Robert James Dunn. In 1900, he was listed in the work of a public historian by the name of John K. Duke, who wrote a regimental history of the 53rd Ohio Volunteer Infantry. Now, why do I find the life of Robert James Dunn to be so valuable to me and so important? He's my great-great-great-grandfather, and I still live nearby to the area where he settled after coming from Ireland and coming back from the Civil War. So the work of public historians is extremely valuable. Local historians and genealogists, family historians, put all of this together, the building blocks of America's story in the history of the world.
Like all historians, local historians are always looking to find that perfect artifact to help them reconstruct the past. Without an artifact, without concrete evidence, a historian simply cannot proceed. But in the area of local history, one of the best places to start out is your local library. Because in a local library, you have access to all sorts of documents throughout the history of your community that can help you build that history of the past. In my local library, located in our county seat about 20-25 miles away from my house, there's an extensive genealogy room. And that genealogy room is not only open to trained historians, but is open to anyone in the county with an interest in telling their family history. Inside that room, there are Army records that tell who served in what regiment, where they were from in Ohio, not only in the Civil War, but also in World War I and World War II. In addition, you are able to find birth certificates. You are able to find marriage certificates, death certificates, and even obituaries that appeared in newspapers as far back as 50, 60, 70, and even farther 100 years ago. So inside your local library, there is a ton of evidence, historical evidence, to build upon to make progress in telling the story of your local area. Another area where local history takes place is inside of your government center, where a lot of records are kept. The deeds to tell who owned what piece of land and where. Also, in addition, like what I spoke earlier of Robert James Dunn being involved in the early days of Cotty's Corner Church in Pike County, Ohio, that information was pieced together through the collection of family members who owned photos of Robert James Dunn and other founding members of Cotty's Corner Church. In addition to that, oral histories of people who were able to remember Robert James Dunn from a long time ago, his ancestors, who were able to piece together the past. Also, there's letters floating around in local communities. Some of the artifacts are still in people's attics, and local historians take all this information together and create and build and retell more accurately the history of their local area. In addition, local historical societies are very active and important to telling local and public history. Local historical societies not only build the history of the past to present to people, but they also are always looking for artifacts to preserve and to present to the public inside of their museums and other means of showing artifacts. So in all these different ways, local historians are able to tell the story of a community, a county, and even a family. If you look through local history, you will also find local historians getting their hands dirty in the field, looking for evidence of where a bridge may have been, looking for evidence for where a road once went, or even looking for the foundation of a family home that has been lost to time. All of this is part of the job of a local historian. And local historians are just as necessary as the historians who tell the story of Abraham Lincoln, Ulysses S. Grant, Dwight D. Eisenhower, or any president that has ever served in the executive branch. Without local historians telling the stories of regiments in the Civil War or individuals who have been forgotten to the larger history, we would not have the building blocks of the larger story of our country and of our world.